Have you ever pictured Richard the Lionheart, the quintessential English king? You know, the brave warrior, sword in hand, defending his beloved England from all threats. It's a powerful image, one we've seen in countless movies and storybooks. But what if I told you that this iconic English king barely even set foot in England? What if the romantic hero we all think we know was, in reality, a total stranger to the kingdom he ruled? Get ready, because today we're pulling back the curtain on one of history's biggest misconceptions. We're going to expose the shocking truth that Richard I, the Lionheart, spent only about 6 months in England during his entire 10-year reign. That's right, just 6 months out of a decade. So, if he wasn't in England, where on earth was he, and what was he doing? The answer will change everything you thought you knew about this legendary monarch. To understand Richard, we have to rewind a bit, not to England, but to France. Richard was born in Oxford, England. That much is true. But he was a Plantagenet, part of a French dynasty that ruled a vast territory called the Angevin Empire. This wasn't just England. It included huge chunks of modern-day France like Normandy, Anjou, and Aquitaine. For Richard, these French lands weren't just foreign possessions. They were his home. He grew up in Aquitaine, a duchy he inherited from his formidable mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine. His first language wasn't English, it was a dialect of French. He was, culturally and politically, a French nobleman through and through. England was less of a homeland and more of a very wealthy piggy bank. So, in 1189, Richard is crowned King of England. What's his first move? Does he tour his new kingdom? Meet his English subjects? Nope. His eyes were fixed on a much bigger prize, a goal that had consumed him for years: the Holy Land. The Third Crusade had been called to recapture Jerusalem, and Richard saw it as his divine mission and the ultimate path to glory. England, to him, was simply the source of funding for this grand adventure. Almost immediately after his coronation, he began what can only be described as a kingdom-wide fundraising spree. He sold off everything that wasn't nailed down: castles, titles, government offices, lordships. If you had the cash, you could buy it. He famously joked that he would have sold London itself if he could have found a buyer. He raised an astronomical amount of money, assembled a massive army, and by 1190, he was gone. He had spent maybe a couple of months in England as king, and he wouldn't be back for a very, very long time. Richard's journey to the Holy Land is the stuff of legend. He was a brilliant military strategist and a fearsome warrior, earning his nickname Lionheart for his courage. He conquered Cyprus along the way, a strategic masterstroke. Once in the Holy Land, he clashed with the legendary Muslim leader, Saladin. They developed a complex relationship of rivalry and mutual respect. Richard won major victories, like the Battle of Arsuf, but ultimately he failed to recapture Jerusalem. After years of brutal fighting, he negotiated a truce with Saladin that allowed Christian pilgrims safe access to the city. It wasn't the total victory he wanted, but his reputation as Europe's greatest warrior was sealed. His crusade was over, but his troubles were just beginning. The journey home was a disaster. Shipwrecked, disguised, and trying to travel across Central Europe, Richard made a fatal mistake. He passed through the lands of his enemy, Leopold Philipp, the Duke of Austria, whom he had insulted during the crusade. He was recognized, captured, and thrown into a dungeon. This is where the story gets even more incredible. The King of England was now a prisoner. Leopold handed him over to the Holy Roman Emperor, Henry VI, who saw a golden opportunity. He demanded a colossal ransom for Richard's release, 150,000 marks of silver. This was an absolutely mind-boggling sum, roughly 2 to 3 times the entire annual income of the English crown. Back in England, the country was in turmoil. Richard's ambitious and treacherous brother John was trying to seize the throne, telling everyone that Richard was dead. But Richard's mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, took charge. This incredible woman, now in her 70s, orchestrated a massive nationwide tax collection. The English people, who barely knew their king, were forced to pay an exorbitant price to free him. They melted down church plates, sheared sheep for their wool, and gave up a quarter of their income. It was a crushing burden, but they paid it. Finally, in 1194, after more than a year in captivity, the ransom was paid, and Richard was freed. He made his triumphant, albeit brief, return to England. This is where the second part of his 6-month stay happens. He landed in March 1194. His main goal? To re-establish his authority, punish his brother John's supporters, and, you guessed it, raise more money. He had himself crowned a second time, just to remind everyone who was boss. He spent about 2 months stamping his authority back onto the kingdom, selling off more offices and lands, and then, by May 1194, he was gone again. He sailed for France and would never, ever see England again. So, where did he go? Back home, to France. The last 5 years of his reign were spent fighting a relentless war against his arch-rival, King Philip II of France. Philip had used Richard's absence during the Crusade and his captivity to seize vast portions of Richard's French territories. For Richard, defending his ancestral lands in Normandy and Aquitaine was far more important than ruling England from a distance. England was the bank. France was the battlefield where his heart lay. He poured all the money he'd just raised from England into building magnificent castles, like the legendary Château Gaillard, and fighting to reclaim his empire. Then, in the spring of 1199, the story comes to an abrupt and almost bizarre end. Richard wasn't killed in a glorious battle against a king or a sultan. He was besieging a minor, insignificant castle in Limousin, France, called Chalus-Chabrol. The story goes that he was there over a dispute about a rumored stash of Roman treasure. One evening, as he walked the perimeter without his full armor, a lone crossbowman on the castle walls took a shot. The bolt struck him in the shoulder. The wound itself wasn't immediately fatal, but it turned gangrenous. After days of agony, Richard the Lionheart, the great Crusader king, died far from England, fighting for a small French castle. He was 41 years old, so let's add it up. A few months after his coronation in 1189, and about 2 months in 1194. That's it, roughly 6 months in total. His heart, quite literally, was buried in Rouen, in his beloved Normandy. His body was buried at Fontevraud Abbey, alongside his father. Only his entrails were buried in Chalus, the site of his death. Not a single part of him was laid to rest in England. So why do we remember him as this great English hero? It's largely thanks to Victorian-era Romanticism. Writers like Sir Walter Scott, in his novel Ivanhoe, painted Richard as the noble, absent king, contrasting him with his villainous brother John. This image of the heroic crusader returning to save England stuck. We fell in love with the legend, not the man. The reality is that Richard was a product of his time, a French-speaking warlord, a brilliant general, and a king who viewed England primarily as a source of revenue for his continental ambitions. He was an absent king who cost his kingdom a fortune, but, in doing so, accidentally created one of history's most enduring and misleading legends. What do you think? Does this change your view of Richard the Lionheart? Was he a hero who pursued a divine quest, or a neglectful king who bled his kingdom dry? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed uncovering this piece of hidden history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories you thought you knew. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.